Got any weekend plans or movie recommendations? Got to keep the tradition alive.
Gotta keep the tradition alive. Oh, you know what I did? I went down to my sister's this weekend, and I saw Zootopia 2, but only clips of it.
I'm sorry. How did you only see tips of it?
Clips of it? Because there's kids running around.
Oh, so you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Were you chasing children?
Somewhat. I also really don't like, maybe this is a hot take, but animals that are like human.
The animal,
So,
what's the anthropomorphic?
anthropomorphic, yeah.
Something like that.
Not a fan. So, but that's
I
all
don't mind.
Zootopia is.
I don't mind it, but that's because I grew up in the heart of Disney animation when all cartoons were talking animals. So, if like, so what you're kind of saying, because everything is being live animated.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like Homeward Bound, I'm like, that's great. That's good stuff.
But like, if a dog walked up to you right now and started talking, you would freak out.
No, that's Homeward Bound. That's like totally fine. It's when they get up on two legs and they, put a coat on.
Oh.
So,
I don't know that would still bother me. I think that's how much Disney has influenced. I'm like,
freaks me
hey,
out.
this fox is wearing a hat. And I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah.
Foxes wear hats, man. And date Maid Marian.
But what do they say?
That one's on me. I didn't pick it up. But they would probably say, welcome to the Lighthouse IT Solutions podcast. Back at it for another episode.
Our last discussion was over AI, and there was quite a bit of good feedback as far as I understand.
It's very old McDonald-y, by the way. I can't talk about AI and be like A-I-E-I-O.
Oh, right. O.
It's an AI
was the
farm.
last one O, you said?
E-I-E-I-O, A-I-E-I-O.
Open.
Listen, guys, he's really trying today, and I really give him a ton of respect. No, today, what we want to talk about in this episode is sort of a new, I'd say almost a new love of mine. I've within about the past year just really have become interested. I don't want to say obsessed, but like invested in the open source movement. And
I thought you were going to say like a new concept. I'm like, whoa, not at
new
all.
Concept.
Well, it's old as heck.
You're reading the same script as me. You're just doing a better job of pushing the Dean Caymans. That's all. No, we thought we would do is we would talk about open source. And, I mean, what is your experience, Griff, with open source? Do you do much with it?
You can't really avoid it if you like understand what open source is. I mean,
chances are, if you're using something commercial, they swiped something from the open source community. That's how widespread it is.
Yeah, I mean, from upstream libraries that do whatever to Android phones using a version of Linux, whatever. There's so many. There's a million examples.
Well, I mean, Android is open source.
Yeah.
There's commercially adapted versions of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that you are probably touching some form of open source, whether you are using an Android phone or honestly, a lot of image formats are open source. So like if you're taking pictures on a MPEG is open source. Well, some of it is. I think some of it's licensed, but there's all types of systems that are developed open source.
Oh yeah.
And I think there's a confusion as to what open source means, right? So open source just means that, look, anybody can look at and view how a program is written, the source code. It's an open book. But what's really cool is that you can inspect, modify, and depending on the licensing, redistribute it. And so I would say like you've probably know like Linux, that's obviously a big one. Firefox, that's a big one. VLC, I love. Oh man,
VLC man. Oh yeah,
the real MVP.
That
VLC,
guy. There's just one guy too who made it and maintained it for a long time himself too.
That's crazy. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not the case anymore, but
that's true.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't argue with you because I don't know. WordPress.
Oh yeah.
Another big one. I know that's not our favorite,
but Still is open source. Yeah.
And then, yeah, Android. So take that. What we have is you have the open source, then you have your proprietary software, right?
Which I think is, for some reason, more of a familiar term to people, like proprietary software. You're like, oh, okay, yeah.
You never call it closed source. You usually call it proprietary. Mm-hmm. But if you're sitting there and you're going, listen, what's the difference? Well, the difference really comes down to when there's licensing with open source, like you might have the GPL, the MIT, Apache licenses. We're not going to go into all of that. It really only matters largely when you go to modify the software. And it's ultimately, it's like if you were to find a bug fix, what they don't want you to do is find something, fix it, and then try to resell it as your own, right? So, there's different licenses in the open source model. It says, look, you're allowed to do all of this, but if you want to figure out a way to profit off of it, you need to contribute back, or you need to make it available for free in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Whereas with proprietary licensing, we don't get to see the source code. You obviously don't get to see, although Windows does have parts of it that are open source. I don't know if you knew that years ago. They had a thing called the Open Computing Initiative, the OCI, and
is this where developers.
That is actually the Steve Ballmer developers thing. Kind of, that was during that age. So there are parts of the Windows operating system that are open source that you can see, and realistically, we're all familiar with. If I want Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, I buy Microsoft Office. Yeah. But I can't change that program. There are companies that make plugins that extend the program, but I can't physically change it.
Yeah.
And so it's just such a, I guess maybe you're sitting there and you're not really sure, is open source right? We want to talk a little bit about open source.
Pros and cons of each, yeah.
Pros and cons. Is it time for your business? And how I kind of learned to be like, listen, I'm gonna start weighing advantages to using open source versus not. And why? Yeah. Maybe as a vendor, if we're sitting here, you're going, Matt, you're our vendor. Should I be worried about why we think actually open source makes things better for our clients?
Yeah. Especially utilizing us as support for that, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, of course.
But I would say the biggest pro is licensing. There is none with open source.
So you're right. Normally, open source is associated with free. Mm-hmm. Okay? It doesn't cost anything. Now, that's not exactly true, but it does mean that you can run some form of the software for free. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens is a lot of platforms have add-ons and build-ons or enterprise licensing or whatever. Or at the very least, what they'll do is they'll say, we're going to sell you support. That's a lot of, like, if you've ever heard of Linux, there's a distribution called Red Hat. They're by far away one of the largest sort of commercially viable versions of Linux, and they've done a lot to keep the community alive and well and commercialized and building reliable versions of Linux. But they've had a free version of their version of Linux, but then they've also had an enterprise, literally called Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or RHEL, if you've ever seen that acronym. And the difference is that you paid for support, right? If you were on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the bug fixes might come a little bit faster, or if you had a problem, you would get a bug ticket. Whereas the Red Hat community would contribute back to CentOS, is one of the big ones that they run. They would contribute back to CentOS, but maybe not as aggressively, or the update channels weren't quite as fast. Might be once a month instead of once a week kind of thing. But also, again, if you had problems, you would call them for support, and they would help you work through the problem. So you had this extra layer of what you're used to, which, right, when I buy software, I want support. That's the proprietary style of like, okay, yep, we know that we have to provide you with help.
Yeah.
But if you are a little bit of a homemaker or lab type of guy, and you want to play around with the software, the open source market has this free plan.
Mm-hmm. I mean, similarly to Linux and Red Hat, that we have the support plus additional features as well, and that's kind of what like Odoo Community versus Enterprise is, which we have a lab about we just recorded.
Yeah, we're big proponents of Odoo here. No surprises there. Odoo has a community plan. So Odoo in and of itself is an open source platform.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is neat is the community edition is fully open source to everybody. As a partner, we pay a little extra, but we get access to all of the software source code as well. It's not hidden. So even those commercial items, like we can view, extend, and see how the code is written. Really neat because it really just shows you, and I guess we'll get into later, but shows you what's going on inside.
Yeah.
But the other thing I guess that you would see is because it's cost effective, even if you have to pay for open source, it's generally way cheaper.
Much cheaper. Yeah.
You tend to be supporting a nonprofit type of organization versus a for-profit.
I mean, you say the word proprietary, and I'm like, well, that's going to be more expensive.
Can't spell like proprietary and profit both start with the same letters, right? So I think it's really like that's a big one. So right off the bat, open source will save you money.
Mm-hmm.
It's synonymous often with free, but it's not always the case. But it does mean your investment is way lower. I
mean, it's free in the way of freedom as well, though. Like the idea that you have freedom to customize and do anything like that as well. So free in a multi-level kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that kind of surprises people to hear, because you'd think if anybody can see my source code, then they can clearly hack it.
Oh, yeah. This is the mini eyes kind of idea.
Well, actually, that transparency can lead to advanced security.
We've also seen recently, though, the social engineering behind that as well, which we can kind of get into. But, yeah, for the most part, the transparency, it's huge. Many people are going to have their eyes on this, and they're going to catch things that maybe a small group, even at like Microsoft, a group of 10, 15 developers who are working on something may have missed. There could be hundreds looking at this one.
Exactly. And typically the community is looking out from many different perspectives instead of just one.
Yeah, true.
So when you're submitting code, so all of these use a backend service. Typically, they'll use a company like GitHub to manage all of it. When I make a change, I submit my change to get approved, and then somebody does a code review and then approves it. Now, it's not a fail-safe system. If you remember a while back, we did have.
Was that Log4j or was that the Redis? I forget which one that was.
It was. I don't think it was Log4j, but it was somebody had infiltrated the supply chain, but the attacker had to take over the admin duties. That person became part of the sort of virtual board.
It was like a multi-year social engineering thing where they took a long time to gain trust of the community and things like that. It was pretty wild.
And I do think that we are auditing for that a little bit more now, but it was unheard of to go through, because again, if I was to submit, malware, somebody would be like, why did you put this in here? This doesn't make sense? And somebody would review it and approve. Where this came in is they had like a couple of fake accounts submit, and they themselves approved it. They were the malicious actor using it under different names. It was a crazy story. It was a crazy story. If you take a look, we did one of our news-based previous podcasts about them.
Yeah, probably 2 years ago.
It was a couple years ago. So
it's not perfect, but neither are. So.
Neither are. The nice thing is, though, is you have more people who are holding you accountable.
Yeah. And I think, like the perspective kind of idea, it's you're not going to be making something for engineers specifically. There's the feature set could be a lot more broad, or the functionality is going to be a lot more broad in an open source method, because a lot more people are going to be more interested in it and interacting and saying, oh, I want it to go this direction or something like that. So
And I know for myself, this concept of the transparency, the many eyes theory that you brought up, it's really important for me from a company standpoint because we're in IT, right? Like so much can change, and we know that some of our vendors have been compromised, and shouldn't say our vendors, but our industry vendors, right, have been compromised. There's some big names that power our industry. And I'm looking at, ConnectWise, Kaseya, and there's, SolarWinds. Like those are big names in our industry. Maybe you've never heard of before, but they supply software to people like Lighthouse, to businesses like Lighthouse.
Yeah.
And they have all had major compromises.
Yep.
And so you look at it and you go, okay, well, but who's auditing their code? How do we know? You look at the FortiGates of the world. Like, how do we know somebody is looking at their code and making sure that it's hardened?
Well, no one's looking at FortiGate code because clearly, every week it seems.
Which, I know we've changed formats, but there's been like 2 major releases, and that's why that's kind of why for us we wanted to tell stories. We want to talk about initiative. We got tired of being depressing all the time, and I'm excited about what open source can do for our clients. It's I don't know, it's just, man, there is so much. The communities are so rich that even if it costs you a few bucks, if you're, it's well worth it.
Yeah,
it's well worth it.
It's flexible. You can make any customizations you need. It's beautiful.
That's an interesting one. You can make customizations. It's open source, right? So typically you have the ability to customize the software. There's licensing that restricts what you can and can't do, but almost entirely the license says if it's for your own personal use, that's pretty common. You can do whatever you want with it. Now you can't redistribute it. There's most all of them will say if you're going to redistribute the software, you need to give credit and you can't charge for the software. Or if you charge, you have to communicate, you
can't turn open source into proprietary.
Right. It's to keep open source projects from getting forked, turned into profit machines, and you're benefiting. So like a big company name like, say, Sony couldn't just take a distribution of Linux.
I'm surprised you didn't use WordPress as an example.
Well, WordPress is a great one. I guess I don't think and dream about that, but you are right. That's a great example. The WordPress dilemma of,
which is probably still ongoing. I haven't checked in on it.
I haven't checked on it either because it was whatever. Yeah. But there's a commercial WordPress and there's an open source WordPress, and if you remember the two worlds they were leveraging against a company who was utilizing WordPress, and basically they were just doing what WordPress.com does, spinning up websites and managing
hosting,
for you. But they made certain tweaks to it, and they weren't contributing back. Yeah. But the gray area is that they were using it for their own product, but the open source, but somehow they were charging them for it, and it was like
and the owner of WordPress or the founder of WordPress was like, give me all that.
And it was because it wasn't that he was stealing value from the open source community. They were making contributions back. He said that they needed to because their business benefited from open source, they needed to provide more funding. But actually the reality is that their business affected the commercial side of the business, and
he didn't like that.
He didn't like that. But yeah, the other thought is, what if Sony were to go in and take a copy of Linux and make it, fork that and make it proprietary, close quote, like you can't benefit from an open source project, make it closed source, and then go, this is ours now. And steal from that community. So that's what a lot of these licenses come down to. You can customize them, and you hit the nail on the head. Is Odoo is a great example of, they have a community edition, they have a paid edition, but at the end of the day, the system is very flexible, very customizable, and it's because of those open source roots.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to mention the OCA at all, but that's a very interesting aspect of it as well.
that's real interesting. So Odoo is, we talked about WordPress. WordPress has a nonprofit and WordPress has a for-profit. Odoo does as well. Odoo operates both. Odoo is the lead contributor of the Odoo ERP system and primary maintainer of Community Edition. But they hold back some features for their enterprise, their paid-for lines. No big deal. We get it. There's an organization that's another nonprofit called the Odoo Community Association, the OCA. And this is what you'll see when stuff like this happens, right? The OCA pops up, and their job is to create but their mission is to create effectively a fully open source, free sort of community of add-ons and modifications to Odoo that effectively, I'm going to say replicate the enterprise, but actually it's to be a true fully open source ERP system. Yeah. They aren't necessarily trying to emulate what Odoo has. In fact, in many cases, Odoo has taken from the community, admittedly, and modified to some drama, right? Just the same, like the whole knowledge app actually was an OCA module that clunky at best, but they took the idea and they went and said, we're going to write our own.
Yeah.
And now that's paywalled, right? But at the end of the day, this OCA organization tries to keep Odoo honest, and I think that actually keeps it so that the costs stay down, because if at any point in time the costs were to get too high, you would just look at migrating to OCA's platform. And there are so many modules. There's OCA makes EDI modules, API, like pretty much every app, nearly every app, there's an OCA equivalent.
I'd say there's probably even more than there are in enterprise.
Hundreds.
I mean, there's significantly more like custom-oriented, very niche apps.
And some of those are great customizations to the pro, like if you're running enterprise.
Yeah. But what about the cons?
What cons? I don't know any cons.
Cons? There's no bad things about open source. You kidding me? What?
Look, okay.
I mean, we kind of already touched on it. No support.
One throat to choke.
Yeah.
That's the proverbial saying, right? The biggest one right off the bat is, who do I go to for support? Now, if you are paying for support or paying a license, then that gives you some entry level. My experience with open source support projects, they are doing things on shoestring budgets. And I would say, even if you're paying for support, don't expect it to be great. Like that's a reality that I think we have to.
Yeah, I mean, it's open source. They're making less money. They don't have.
They're not charging you much. Like, one of the open source organizations we've adopted recently is for virtualization. They charge a fraction, like like $500 a license a year, and you get full access to everything, right? But look, you get a couple tickets, but are they helpful? Sometimes. Look, sometimes you just need that help.
Yeah.
For the most part, you're using the community. For the most part, you're using user forums, Reddits. User groups are really big with open source community. Like, there is a community that you need to find and be a part of, and that's really where you're going to get your value from.
Some open source, apps have great documentation though too. So, boom. Now you don't really have too many issues, or if you do have issues, you're fine because there's so much documentation. But
arguably,
also,
every open source project has better documentation than any commercial product I've ever seen.
But that's not.
I don't understand
a hard rule. There's often ones that also have terrible documentation.
I'm just talking if you take your averages.
Yeah.
I bet you the average is infinitely better. Yeah. I mean, there's always documentation for open source, even if it's bad. Whereas some proprietary products, there's no documentation.
Yeah.
So proprietary software gives you that warm and fuzzies. They're making money. Their job is to keep making money off of you. There is a true vendor with an investment in making sure that they do their best. So you get better support. Support's usually the big one. But that doesn't mean that you can't have providers be that middleman, right?
Yep. Honestly, that's where Lighthouse has been able to help people quite a bit. With Odoo, admittedly, for now.
Odoo and we use some open source projects, but we expose them in such a way that we're able to, leverage them and provide them to you with minimal management.
Yeah.
Another thing with open source, although I think this con is getting lower and lower, I think the introduction of containerization technologies has made the concept of complexity and learning curves much smaller. If I'm being honest, this used to be an awful one. Everything was a manual command to install their software. And some had really good documentation and you could follow it right along and it would be perfect when you're done. But admittedly, with the advent of a technology called Docker, which creates containers, you write a simple file called a compose and execute Docker against that compose file, and it builds the environment for you. That has made things tremendously easier. Learning curve can be a little bit more difficult because not everybody can agree on what the UI and they aren't necessarily hiring user experience experts.
Usually that's kind of the last.
But I've seen a lot of improvements in this space too. Take a look. If you were to go out and Google Linux distributions on YouTube, or not Google, but search for Linux, they're owned by Google anyway. But if you're going to YouTube and look up Linux video, like Linux distro comparisons, you would see, when I first started in IT, it was painful to try to get Linux to work and to run, even if you had a desktop version. And now, yes, there's still some hiccups, but it is incredible at how just out of the box Linux has become.
Even in the past 5 years, there's some ones that are just super easy.
Yeah, and focused on what your need is, right? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, if you want to be a gamer, you could use Bazite as a distribution, and it's just customized for gamers, right? And maybe you really want to have a hyper-focused approach. There's versions of Linux that will minimize the user interface to only what you need to work on and focus.
Yeah.
Everything else is very difficult to get to, but your productivity then scales high, right? So there's that concept exists in Linux that you can't do with Windows. If you couldn't make an IT administrator's edition of Windows and then publish it, right? So somebody took a version of one of the big distros and forks it and makes it so that it's there's a version of Linux dedicated towards security testing called Kali Linux, right? You can boot it up and you can immediately start doing penetration testing. It's just, so some really good space in there in customization as we kind of go back to that. But
complexity and learning curve is definitely decreasing in terms of
when things don't work,
open source,
they are far more frustrating because they're not as straightforward.
Yeah.
We talk a little bit there's a hidden cost to open source.
Like we said, it's free, but sort of. It's free in the term freedom, and
maybe
you can do
paying.
anything.
Maybe you're paying for technical support, but again, you need to go after. We talk about all that. It's the type of person to maintain it needs to be technologically savvy.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting there and you're like, yeah, I'm not really tech savvy, but I'm able to maintain our Windows network pretty solidly. Look, good on you. We probably should still talk. We'd love to help you. Just make things a little easier for you, right? Let's get us to your focus on. But the puppy analogy, free puppy analogy, I had a free cat, and that free cat has cost me probably $6,000 or $7,000.
Yeah, you didn't pay for the cat, but you certainly paid for vets or
every vet bill, and he's had a couple of
food,
emergency bills, and then as a result, he's on special food, and then years later, we find out he's diabetic, And
But what if
he's so
you
special.
paid, $1,000 or something for that special breed of whatever cat, and then you still had to do all those things?
Yeah,
So
I guess that's the
overall, it's probably cheaper, even with
Probably.
support and that kind of thing.
But I'd also argue that the cat you got for free is going to last longer.
Yeah, probably.
It can have costs associated with it. You're higher, you need a more expensive type of technician to work on it who knows that system. It's a far more limited community because the community is diverse. So you need a guy who knows what they're doing.
That kind of moves nicely into the risk, though, of it in general.
You really do hedge your bet that they are sustainable, don't you?
Open source projects get abandoned, that's not a irregular thing. But again, proprietary software also gets abandoned, especially with like mergers and acquisitions of random companies and that kind of thing.
It does. And with a vendor, if a proprietary software, there's usually a migration path because they want you to go to the next big thing, right? So at least you're going to make a direction. They bought that company because they want their customers. Open source, you're right. If they don't have the support, they don't have the attention, they don't have the passion or drive, they can fade and fizzle. So you really do have to be careful of who you hitch your wagon to, proverbially. Now, again, you could run that software for the rest of your life.
You just want to have updates,
but there's no bug fixes. There's no updates.
There's no features, additions.
And
or
if
anything.
you really get invested, I know companies that have used like frameworks that those frameworks fizzled out. They maintain their
themselves.
They write their own updates. That's a lot. You weren't really expecting that, and so
you just got to be really cautious about who you're getting in bed with open source, because
do your research.
Is there a ton of people utilizing it?
Exactly.
Is there a better alternative? That
what's their history? What is the community saying about them? Because a lot of groups, what will happen is they'll disagree on something
and split.
And that's not a bad thing, but it's a thing.
Look at Mac compared to Linux.
I think it might be OwnCloud or something like that, and NextCloud, whatever. I think those used to be part of the same umbrella. Anyway, somebody separated off in NextCloud and created a competitor product, and it's still open source, but they disagreed on one fundamental thing. And when NextCloud went forward with it, a big group of community developers broke away. And that's a great example of a product that is commercialized but also open source, like they have. So you now took away all of those clients, and they still exist today.
Just got to make sure that fork though that you're going with is going to last.
If you make the decision to go with the fork, is that going to last?
Yeah.
So do your research. Figure out if it's somebody you want to hitch your wagon to, as they say. Some might actually randomly change their licensing models, so you need to be prepared for that. Now, again, when a product is released, it's released with that license. It's just the next product might have, or the next version might be released under a new license. Maybe you don't like that license. Maybe it restricts you. We've seen HashiCorp is a really big company that does a lot with security and DevOps, and they've changed their licensing, and a lot of people made them mad.
Yeah.
You fall in love with their products, and now it's like, well, now it's a much more restricted version of their open source community, almost as if they're trying to turn proprietary.
Yuck.
So, all right. So why am I so excited? Why is this important?
Yeah, why are we even talking about this?
Why is Lighthouse? I mean, the big one that kind of was a major. We've always used some form of open source, right? But
it's hard not to, admittedly, if you really get into the nitty gritty. But
yeah, but we really started to adopt open source along the same time as our Odoo journey.
Yeah, which again was probably 2 years ago now.
Yeah, for sure.
But that alone has done a lot for us. Saved quite a bit of money in software costs. It's helped, establish a department and a support service
and built out sort of like you said, it's its own department. Odoo created a department there where we now focus on helping clients do process development, process automation, business intelligence. Like, it's really about harnessing intelligence and really about leveraging that open source community. And those tools are very, important to us. And effectively, a lot of those tools we leverage. It's important that we use open source for it.
Yeah.
So now we've talked, there's no surprise, we've talked about how big of a platform, and it's gotten several name drops here, right? Not even its purpose, but it's such a great example to us of what the open source community can be when it's very hyper focused. But there's so many other products. Like, if you've ever visited our status page when we have outages, we refer to that. That is an open source project that we leverage and host. There is some time automation and time tracking stuff that we do. There's we're actually intermingling a lot of our AI models. We're using the open source versions of AI models now. And that allows us to do a couple things, which allows us to self-host as well as, leverage external resources, but at fractions of the cost, and still be able to support those groups. It's just some of the business automation stuff. N8N is a name that has exploded recently, and we've been using it for years.
Yeah.
And have been on that platform. We've done some really cool automations in N8N and written some custom stuff that that now the product is just, the platform's even more incredible. Arguably, they're one that seems to be shifting on trying to figure out how to profit more off of it, and that's the bummer. But they still maintain an open source community. And then some internal initiatives, to be honest with you, that we have. A lot of that is being leveraged based on open source. But why? And at the end of the day, we talked about the sustainability risk. And why do I think that it's important that Lighthouse uses open source and we leverage it? One, it's going to stabilize our cost for our clients. We know you're paying a lot. We're doing our best. We don't, we know we're a pretty significant line item for a lot of clients.
I mean, 2 podcasts ago, we talked about how expensive hardware is.
Now hardware is getting more expensive.
Yeah.
What if we can leverage open source technologies to reduce your operational costs?
Yep.
Well, one, that's what Lighthouse is doing. We're leveraging open source technologies because it reduces our operational costs. If we reduce our operational costs, we can still focus on, growing our business appropriately, but without the overhead of proprietary software. The second thing is it puts us in charge of our own, our own sort of surface exposure, which actually for us is going to be smaller. We have full control over the stack and its hosting as a result, because most of these things we have to self-host.
Yeah.
And you would think, well, it's nice because Microsoft's got these security vendors, but they're also a giant target.
A huge target.
So we're in the age where we can purchase a lot of commercially acceptable security products and have a lot of insight, where we can open our books up to third parties to help us make sure that things are staying secure. But at the same time, we also don't have the giant exposure that a big company does. They don't know what we are. We don't know what we have or what we're worth to try to crack that open. They know how important it is to try to hack Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, it's also easier with like the whole AI ransomware thing or the AI hacking thing.
Yes.
Let's just trigger a automation that goes after all of these targets, and all of these targets are Microsoft people.
And
stuff like that.
So that's some of those ways is it's going to reduce cost. The other thing for us in our industry is the sustainability risk that we talked about with open source is actually completely different. For us, there is a ton of investment going on in our industry, which is causing products to get bought up. And that means that a product that I love today, I love that you brought this up earlier. It's like a product that I love today is going to get swallowed whole by a bigger company. And what they want to do is they want me to move over to their other product. They don't even care about the product that they bought. They want me to move to theirs. They were just buying a customer. They weren't truly excited about the product. And so we're seeing this massive turnover to the point where if you talk to our team, it feels like we're constantly changing software. And the reality is we are, right? We talk about our solutions and usually don't name them by name because there's acquisitions that happen, and then the company that's bought that company do a terrible job.
Yeah.
And so you're like, well, you no longer do what you say you do, or you're no longer investing in this technology. I need to move on.
Or you're trying to like actually kill it so that you use their competitor who had just acquired them, and yeah. It's a whole
I mean, we there is a company that we were heavily invested in, actually spent more money per month with them than we spent on labor, than salaries. Like, it was a huge vendor. They got bought by somebody, by a company that doesn't respect security. And what happened? Over the course of that next year, we started to notice things creep in, and you're like, well, I can't afford to have this culture seep into my business. And so now you have to move all of these products,
foundational products,
and they're foundational products.
Yeah.
And so it's like, with open source, we're in charge of our own identity, that even if something were to happen, we could still run that system. We could take ownership of it. And so it's just, for us, the sustainability risk is because our industry is volatile. It's really crazy,
and that's a unique situation. I think a lot of other industries probably don't have that kind of issue, but for us, things change so quickly in IT.
Yeah.
So
as a result, a lot of our services, a lot of our products, platforms, things that we're using or internal use, we're leveraging a lot of Linux and a lot of open source projects. We're using, admittedly, I keep making this plug, but a lot of our customizations are managed because, right, Odoo is a framework. We run Odoo as a business. Like, Odoo is our dashboard. And so that's what's really cool, is we can create these integrations with these systems that we never had before. And so, we're not, are we using things like Open Libre yet? No, but we thought about it. We joked about making the team all move to Linux, except it's only half a joke. Like, what do you do? There's so much more for our team to be able to use. And at the end of the day, we want to use the best tool for the job that provides the most stability for our clients. And, I guess if open source is that option, then that's the direction we go.
So you got any advice for small businesses, outside of us?
Yeah. Don't ignore open source.
Yeah.
I think if you are shopping around,
consider it.
Consider finding out who the open source providers are.
Yeah.
But be careful, because there are some open source projects that are trendy, and there are some open source products that are free. I would argue that the most successful and most stable open source product is going to have some paid to play type of situation of, like, yes, you can get a free version, a community edition, if you will, or you can pay for it. That's the company that has that's the organization that has things, because what they're doing is they're investing in the nonprofit side, right? Because no matter what you do, there's going to be costs to maintaining. And if you have a guy that is monitoring source code and making sure that stuff's not going in, you probably need to pay that guy, right? So,
but it'll probably be cheaper than a proprietary version.
I guarantee you it'll be cheaper. I mean, in every case that I've seen, open source is cheaper.
So unless you're very techie and that kind of thing, then definitely go with the support tier, if you will.
Or at least go with the one that has a support tier as an option.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily
you
have
always
to use
upgrade,
it.
Yeah.
Or you start with the support, level off, drop support. The software will largely work, right?
Yeah.
Unless it is licensed for extra features, Like in the case of Odoo, that is a thing. But you can start on one of the, if it has a pay for support program, though, I'm just saying that means that they have a profit model. It means they have a revenue stream.
Yeah.
And that's a good one that's a good sign of a healthy environment.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't have a revenue stream, see who backs them, because sometimes they are sponsored. There are some solutions that are sponsored or invested in other organizations, and that's how they can be free. So maybe you'll notice that Microsoft invests heavily in them. Okay, they're probably going to stick around for a while.
Yeah, probably.
Right? So there is stuff like that. Like there's a web firewall that exists out there that is actually, I've come to find out, was owned by a security company. They still maintain it, and they have a open source model, but they also have a paid open source model. But when you really deep dive into it, they also incorporate that product into their commercial product. They expand and extend on it, but it sort of sits on its own. They heavily invest in this open source platform. And you know what? You may find it's not the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, industry-specific software that's proprietary often is pretty good for whatever you're doing, but it's also going to be costly, almost for sure.
And I would argue, in both of them, you're going to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
Free is not free puppy. It's not free kit.
Yeah, I mean, the onboarding of proprietary software might be a lot easier. Because there might not be customizations and things you need for specifically
You might not
for
be able to customize.
Yeah, you might not be able to do anything though. So I don't know.
So to me, I argue for some companies, taking a product, even if you're just on the community version of Odoo, and building your own app could be cheaper than migrating, because almost always the open source companies have a belief that your data is your data, and that is something that the vendors don't have. That is a great question to ask as well, is if I leave, how do I get my data?
Yeah.
And if they say, I don't know.
Get out of there.
That's not a great answer.
No.
And if they say, we'll give you a SQL dump or a backup with a SQL database, okay, maybe, but you're never going to look at that database because it's convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you going to know what data table is what? Unless they provide it to you in a usable format. And products that are open source generally have, even if they were to just give you the SQL dump, it wouldn't matter because there's documentation on what those database files mean. What table is this?
It's kind of a short run, long run kind of thing. In the long run, you're probably going to be better off with open source.
You're going to have some higher capital expenses that I don't think people realize with open source.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to have lower operational expenses.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And look, sometimes just go proprietary. It's the right option. You don't need to customize it. Maybe you're a little too small. You don't want to put in the capital expenditures. Yeah. That's all fine.
I hear a lot of people say, it's because this native integration that I have to, do with this other software suite that is something we can't move.
We spend so much money on software that integrates with other software. Like that's the thing, is if you need to have 75 different products to integrate with your product,
you should probably be moving to something that can do
should be
the majority of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's so frustrating because I see it all the time, and I see it all the time because that's what was happening to us.
Yeah.
We were on very major commercial systems,
and
many I was of them paying for integrations. I think this is no lie. We paid $2,000 or $3,000 a month for integration software.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, at one point in time, our business system was so terrible for you guys. We had a separate project management system.
Oh yeah,
but because our business relied on us operating on the same system, we had to find something that allowed you guys to work easily, but still communicated back to us so that we could do billing. Because I can't have two billing systems. That's stupid as a business. So we had to pay for this extra system that was like $500 a month, so that you guys, because project management was not as good in that system.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. It's real, and it's just now is the time. There are so many great open source products.
Yeah.
Now is the time to give it a good look.
Yeah, I don't know what happens in the last 5 years, but it's...
And with costs going up on hardware,
Yeah.
could we be loading Linux on our machines and going back to a day where we're doing remote desktop or remote access servers and stuff where it doesn't matter that you're not running Windows? Most applications are web-based, or you can run, like I know we have solutions that allow you to interact with Windows servers. Now, the world could be that you're running a server that's got 128 gigs of RAM that you paid $500,000 for. Just K, JK, not really, but it's a real possibility. But versus buying a whole bunch of computers, now you can downgrade the computers.
Yeah. Lower minimum tech
consumer
specs.
memory is going to be harder to find.
Yeah.
All right. Let's figure out, what did you learn today, Griff?
Open source is powerful, but you should do your research.
You really should. And look, we're here. We're committed to open source. We've learned that it can be a lifesaver. It's not a silver bullet.
No.
But when it makes sense, it makes sense.
Especially with the right support.
Especially with the right support. Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking about it or you're toying with the idea of doing open source or how it might fit your business, let's talk. Let's just see if it makes sense. What is your gap? What is your desire? Let's focus and see if maybe open source is just the right way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Save some money, man. Eventually. Like I know we said that there's some capital expenditures probably a little bit higher.
Moving software at all, though, is going to have quite a bit.
But you will generally notice significant cost savings and return on investment with open source once you get past the proverbial hurdles and if you plan things out correctly. It's like a lot of things. If you plan it out right, you're going to end up in a much better spot than you thought you would be. Saving money.
Yeah. Do it in phases. Yeah.
I come back to, I'll harp on it again. I come back to when we started moving into, and we really wanted to adopt open source, and we got into the, Odoo world. We weren't sure. We felt it was going to be a move backwards. And I feel more free than I've ever felt because I took a phone call from a guy that wanted to sell software because it integrated and helped us do all of this. And I said, I just took a look. Like, I could write a module for Odoo that would do that for me.
Yeah.
It would take me a few days, sure. That was my investment.
You would have no monthlies, though, after that. So.
But he wanted to start the conversation. He wanted $500 a month.
Yeah.
And it was like $100 for every client after that. And you're just like, so $6,000 to start and then $100 for every client. Well, you don't have to do this license for this client. I said, but why would I do different for every client?
Yeah, that makes it so complex and needlessly. Yeah, no, thank you.
So, at the end of the day, look, I'm just going to say it's worth it. It's worth it. Like, if I look at what my development costs would be for that, it might be a couple grand, but that's half of the 6,000. And then after that, it's in a system I'm already living in.
Yeah, your return on investment might be a year. Like, cool.
It's not an integration. It's not another website. It's not another password to get hacked. It's not.
Yeah.
It's in the same spot. I click a new button. It's just so. Anyway, I know you're out there. If you're curious, reach out to us. We'd love to help you out. It really is the right time to take a look at it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Whoa.
And we're not doing the right thing. Now that we're on the tubes of you. The kitten, the kitten tubes.
Yeah.
Check this out. Feel free to subscribe to this episode.
Because when you say
channel.
subscribe, it highlights it. Yeah. Forgot about that.
If you like this episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. We do this on video, so you can see my pretty bald face. Well, my baby. I guess my face isn't bald. It's just the top.
Does Apple have video now? Because Spotify has video now. Is Apple just...
I don't know. No,
falling behind.
I think so. Are they falling behind? Maybe. Even though the MacBook Neo is awesome.
If you're like a student.
Yeah, okay, but a $599 MacBook
That's
in
crazy.
this economy.
I mean, yeah, it's wild.
I
I couldn't do 8 gigs of RAM. I would never be able to use a Chromium browser.
but
Still,
if you had a family member that needed a cheap
somebody
laptop,
above 60 years, probably.
if you had, I think, I don't know. You legitimately, it's hard not to be like, this is a real.
It's crazy that they did that. Yeah.
Because do we think that $500 laptops? They've largely assumed the cost of the memory prices too. Their costs have not gone up very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate that they know that they were overcharging on memory, but I think as a result, they really didn't increase their prices.
They've been so bad on that. And admittedly, when the Neo 16 gig version comes out, whenever that'll be next year or something, then that's a heck of a better version in my mind. But
and that is the thing. It's all built on the processor because they're using the iPhone's processor, the A18.
Yeah.
But who cares?
Mm-hmm.
ARM is highly efficient. In that space, you're getting a Mac screen, you're getting a Mac keyboard. You know the touchpad's going to be good.
I'm just not the.
It's even. I've heard initial reviews. I've not had my hands on it. It's fully metal.
That's cool. Yeah.
You would think they would go cheap and go plastic. Nope. It's a full metal frame.
I'm just not the person though. I can't video edit. I can't even probably photo edit.
No, and it's not the right machine for me either.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is like
It's crazy. Yeah. Especially
is
for school people, like kids and college kids. College kids, absolutely. If I was entering college, I'd buy that immediately.
Jeez.
But
So yeah, there you go. Maybe we do a Lighthouse Labs on a Neo. Probably not because I have no use for one.
yeah, no use for one.
We would demo it and
It
then
would just sit there.
It would just sit there. So, all right. Well, that's it. Appreciate everybody. We'll catch you next time on the next episode of the Lighthouse IT Solutions podcast. Stay safe out there.
Too.